Hello and welcome to Sectors Up Close. I'm Ramzan Karamali. Today we'll be looking at the pharmaceutical industry, and my guest is Joachim Clement, Head of Strategy at Liberum Capital. Well, the pharmaceutical industry is facing a number of challenges as the world emerges from the pandemic. Several of the world's largest companies in the sector are sitting on significant cash piles. Many industry watchers believe that these firms will need to invigorate their pipelines of medicine as key drugs go off patent before the end of the decade. The performance of these stocks hasn't been anything to write home about in recent times. Looking at the S&P Pharmaceuticals Select Industry Index, which contains 40 of the biggest names in the sector, well, it's fallen by almost a quarter since its peak over 2 years ago, as the demand for COVID vaccines began to fall. Pfizer, a household name now as a result of its COVID treatments, though, has invested. In March, it agreed a deal to buy Seagen, the cancer drug maker, for $43 billion. If approved, this would be the biggest acquisition in the sector since 2019. So is this a sign that big pharma companies are willing to spend that cash? And could we see more deals emerge this year? Well, to help us answer that question, I'm joined by Joachim Clement from Liberum Capital. Joachim, that Pfizer deal that's in the offing, is that the start of new bigger deals on the way?
Well, the industry certainly has enough cash to enjoy bigger deals and to kind of consolidate a little bit. However, we also have to be aware that the pharmaceutical industry overall has piled up a lot of debt during the period of low to zero interest rates. To give you some numbers, 10 years ago, the average net debt to EBITDA ratio of global pharma was 0.5. Today, it's at 1.5. So there is definitely also need to use that cash to reduce debt.
So this week we heard from Novavax, and they said they were going to cut around 25% of its workforce, and their shares surged on the back of that. Is this something we're going to see in the sector going forward?
Novavax is clearly a COVID winner, where I would say this is a return to normal. After the pandemic is over, you don't need that much staff, and this is kind of another right-sizing exercise for these companies that have had a splendid 2-3 years.
I heard one analyst say that pharma stocks were a defensive play. Would you go along with that?
Absolutely. To give you an idea, we expect this year for the S&P 500 earnings to drop by about 8 to 10%. In Europe, 12 to 15%. For pharmaceuticals, we expect earnings to remain flat for the sector. So it's clearly a much better outlook on the earnings side because of the defensiveness of the sector.
One area in particular that seems to be getting a fair bit of attention are obesity drugs. What's your take on that?
Yeah, obesity drugs and anything that is related to the obesity pandemic, like insulin and other producers, they are clearly surfing a wave that is a structural growth trend. The obesity epidemic is not going away anytime soon. In fact, we're getting worse and worse. So companies like Novo Nordisk, for example, that are leading in insulin production, or other companies that are producing drugs to fight or help prevent obesity, are clearly winners in this trend.
Alzheimer's is another treatment that people seem to be focused on too. We heard from Eli Lilly not so long ago saying that they're looking for the US regulators to approve a drug that they're working on. Do you see that as another growth area too?
It is definitely a growth area. However, we have to be aware with Alzheimer drugs, they have a very spotty history of successful clinical trials. We just over the last couple of weeks have actually seen, for the first time in a long time, really positive surprises from clinical trials. You mentioned the Eli Lilly outcome. So we are going in the right direction. But it is a riskier area than, say, the obesity-related area in the pharmaceutical industry.
And just finally, are there any stocks that you particularly like at the moment in this sector?
Well, I've already mentioned Novo Nordisk, which is an eternal favorite of mine. Another company that I like, or that we like in the sector, is Sanofi, which is a really high-quality pharma company with high profitability that we just introduced to one of our model portfolios as a top pick in the sector.
Joachim Clement from Liberum Capital, many thanks for those insights. And that was your look at the pharmaceutical industry. I'm Ramzan Karamali, and this is Reuters.